Hello and welcome to CNBC Africa. My name is Zanella Morrison. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation of advancing MSME through innovation and global collaboration. Joining me in studio today, I should say, is a number of guests that are going to help us to deepen the conversation. An amazing panel, and of course you have connected. So stay with us and let's have a look at what this hour is going to be about.
South Africa's startup business scene is driven by ambitious entrepreneurs solving real problems in fintech, health, agriculture, and education, among other industries. But turning an idea into a thriving business in South Africa is no easy feat. From limited access to early-stage funding to regulatory red tape, poor infrastructure, and a lack of mentorship, South African startups face steep odds. Statistics say about 30% of startup businesses fail within the first 3 years of operation. Many brilliant ideas fail before they get a fighting chance. And yet, a whole community of startup founders fights on. That's where many hope Start-Up20 South Africa will step in by connecting entrepreneurs to policymakers, investors, and global networks. As part of the G20's broader vision for innovation-led growth, Start-Up20 is helping shape policy environments that support startups. What startup business in South Africa requires is a platform that highlights African innovation on the global stage and pushes for change that unlocks opportunity, especially for youth, women, rural, and township-based founders who are still marginalized. Because building a business in South Africa isn't just about profit, it is about impact, resilience, and rewriting the future for an entire nation.
A subject I'm extremely passionate about, one that I've managed to see in action all over the continent. And today's conversation mainly around the G20 opportunity for us to really collaborate and to engage and to have dialogue that is going to shift how we think about the ecosystem and the value it holds to unlock Africa's future. So it's going to be a very exciting conversation. And to have this conversation, we're very honored to have the chairman of the Start-Up20, Vuyani Jachana, despite being an avid entrepreneur himself who's changing people's lives to data and technology for a greater part of your career, actually. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for the conversation. And then we also have Matthew Smith joining us, the managing director and co-founder of Pineapple. Matthew, thank you for being here and sharing your insights with us later on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much as well to Jade. Jade, it's an honor to have you, Jade Appard. She's the CTO and co-founder of Masakane Lelapa AI. So we need you for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Simbisai, I've practiced it forever, then when I have to say it. Chizande, the Chief Operations Officer for IDF Capital, and Capital is a big conversation. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you very much for having me here.
And to set the scene for the conversation, I think the foundation of it is in the dialogues that you've been given the responsibility to run over time. But Vuyani, before I go to you, I forgot about Lyle. Lyle is joining us on Zoom. Lyle Eckstein, the co-founder and chief product officer for Ozo. Lyle, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Lyle, I'll make a point of coming to you in just a minute. I'm just setting the scene with Vuyani. Vuyani, I need you to take us through some of the dialogues and conversations you're having. The focus has to change about what we talk about. We can't keep talking about the same things when it comes to medium-sized enterprises. How have you elevated the conversation to be able to change things in a meaningful way?
So I think, firstly, if you look at the Start-Up20, it's an engagement group of the G20, and you know that South Africa is hosting the G20 presidency. Our responsibility is to look at all the challenges that are facing small businesses and startups and elevate them to global leaders and make recommendations and proposals for them to adopt, specifically looking at issues like access to investment and finance, looking at policy foundations, whether you're talking about incubators, accelerators, even regulations that include simplifying regulations to enable startups and SMEs to thrive. We also look at the whole area of inclusion, how to make sure we are more inclusive. This is the first G20 presidency for Africa. So therefore, we have to make sure that we are more inclusive. We look at the aspirations of the startups and investors and small business in Africa to actually grow the economies of the continent. So, and again, for South Africa specifically, we're talking about township and rural enterprises. How do we deal with the challenges they face, access to market, infrastructure constraints, and so on? So we are running task forces. Some of the members of the task force are here in the audience today. They are looking at what has been achieved in Brazil, what was achieved in India, and approved by global leaders. The whole idea is to get a joint action at a global level to deal with the challenges of this massive sector, which is a big job creator across the world. So that's the conversation. So it's a two-track conversation. What do we do in South Africa to solve our own issues? But also, what do we need global solidarity to actually solve some of the most stubborn problems, challenges that are facing this sector? So this is the conversation we're having in South Africa, and it's more inclusive. All the G20 countries are participating. Also, some of the countries in the continent are also in the discussion.
And I think we've seen a number of examples of what the challenges are, but also we've seen organizations overcoming them. And Matthew, I come to you with that question, is that you understand how to get to the other side in a meaningful and a sustainable way. We drive around, we see what Pineapple is doing. What was the philosophy that for you made you break through and be able to launch with a Pineapple solution?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of grit. So that's inevitable in doing a startup. In terms of breaking through the funding barrier, I won't lie, I think funding is a big challenge for startups. We were incredibly fortunate in many respects in the way things panned out. There were a few times where Pineapple was very close to not existing as a business in the early days. And then we had a few people who really believed in what we were doing. But when I think about sort of that funding landscape, I do think there's a big challenge and gap to solve there, especially in the very early high-risk stages of funding startups. And I think there's a lot of people and a lot of good businesses that don't really get the chance to exist because of that gap. But yeah, I think the philosophy for us is gratitude and keep going and find a way. Like we refuse to give up.
And I think we need that. We need people that lead up front with that hope. But a lot of people don't know that, I'm sure they don't. You're running a digital business. So digital is a core part of a lot of businesses that will make it into the future in a sustainable way. And Jade, what is, I think, the ability for South Africa or for the continent to fully step into this AI opportunity?
I think we've seen the world go, frankly, a little bit too mad around AI. And one of the reasons this has become so is because of the great startup communities that exist overseas and a startup funding environment and a regulatory environment that really supports those AI startups. And so many of the organizations that do exist in the world in the AI, in the tech space, are really because they've had a really strong culture of startups, of investing in early stage startups. And so for Africa to really meet that, we always say that AI was by academics in Europe, it was by startups in the US, and in Africa it's really about the communities. And what I've noticed through the journey is that those communities have done amazing strides in actually putting together talent and putting together credentials, experience, etc. But there's this big gap in actually reaching entrepreneurship. And I think that's because we don't have as much startup support. There are not loads and loads of people in startups. There are not lots and lots of people invested in that early stage area. And it's actually quite hard to start a business in South Africa and get international investment. As a small business, it's a lot of red tape. And that can, not only red tape, but can also influence the value of your startup overseas. And so I think, one of the things we need to do in South Africa is really look at, what are the regulatory things that we can do to ease up on early stage startups, to ensure that they get international investment as well as local investment, but also this idea of how are we spurring on, at a large scale, startup community. There are a couple of pockets of people doing amazing work of bringing startups together and bringing the discussions together. But we haven't seen it at a scale. And it'll be very interesting to see how we can collaborate and build ties to US institutions or other African institutions to kind of grow that dialogue and provide more mentorship for each other.
And that happens a lot in a lot of the incubators, right? Really trying to create collaboration with other incubators across. But Simbisai, Jade laid the platform really for you to say, from a funding perspective and this international and global stakeholder relations Vianney refers to, what are the conversations being had? What is the appetite and the narrative as to why invest in Africa as an investor?
Thank you very much. At IDF Capital, we are very intentional in how we deploy our capital. So inclusion and impact is at the heart of what we do. That's why we launched the first ever gender lens investing private equity fund in Africa, because we recognize that most startup businesses or SME businesses are excluded, from the traditional banking models, because traditional banking models are quite risk averse. So you need also innovative finance mechanisms. That's why we have to do venture capital differently than they would do it in Silicon Valley, because Africa has got its own challenges as well. When we are talking about market share, I think a product in South Africa might take 10 years, to gain the same market share that it would get maybe in America, So those are some of the nuances that we have to deal with to say what works for Africa, what works for South Africa. And then when we then look at infrastructure, I think just comparing South Africa and other African countries, South Africa is quite well developed in infrastructure. So it makes it quite easy, for you to launch your fintech, because we've got quite a developed telecommunications network. But then when you get to other countries, the same does not apply. Even with your logistic businesses as well, you've got a well-maintained road network. But when you go to other African countries, it's quite different. So our financing has to be bespoke, It has to address, the needs in the businesses. It has to be also contextual, taking the different country contexts, into consideration as we structure the transactions. It's quite a challenging environment because of the risk. But like I said, we deploy intentional capital. I think we have done a lot of work in trying to de-risk most of those startup investments. And also, we spoke about the ecosystem. So when you can pull together different forms of capital, when you've got your blended finance, when you've got your catalytic capital, then it goes a long way in de-risking startup businesses in Africa.
And when you speak about what works for Africa, are we still having the conversation of having to teach investors what Africa is about? And I know, is it an international issue of what the challenge is, or do we also have it at a home challenge of people just not being open to understanding what it takes to run a business in South Africa?
Yeah, I think on the main, there has to be an understanding of the market. So one has to understand that if you look at the African continent, for example, you will see what many people could define as fragmented value chains, and they would see negatives in that. But actually, it's small businesses, not big business. There's no concentration of the economy and so on, unlike South Africa. But in that fragmentation, there lies resiliency and a much more massive platform to lift more and more people. Understanding how to work when a fragmentation is not a negative, it's actually a positive. And I think what we are doing in South Africa today, it means if you're investing in the continent, you need to understand that phenomenon, that you must be a friend of fragmentation, because that brings a resiliency for you. But what happens in South Africa, because we're orientated around big systems, highly concentrated economy, very tight systems where the consumers are looking for big malls and so on. We are all working towards consolidation, which is a reverse, it's kind of antithesis to what we need to solve. We need to solve for scale, but we're going the other way because that's how the orientation of the main economy is centered around. So we have to unlearn some of the things that we have been taught at school that we grew up with to understand that it's okay to have small people supplying big businesses. You shouldn't seek to say, consolidate, aggregate them so that they can fit the big system. So this is, and this is not philosophical. It's a practical thing. We spend more time instead of fixing the much more smaller business structure to actually be able to be part of the bigger ecosystem. So in the continent, I have worked a lot when I was at Vodacom. You see the fragmentation, but everyone is doing business, and you need to appreciate that. So it's for the investor to appreciate the resiliency that comes out of fragmentation, which is on its own is a positive.
And it works on the continent with millions of people participating on a daily basis, and the system keeps on going. Matthew, you put a lens, and I'm wondering if it's what also helped Pineapple in understanding risk and how to calculate risk, right? What would you say are the things in which that we don't look at when we're calculating risk and we're able to assure investors that this is the risk, but calculating it, you should actually have assurance that we're actually solving for it?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two components. From what I've seen, it's easier to have success in a business when you're addressing a market that already exists, that market is developed. It's a much more risky endeavor to go and create a market from scratch and then turn that market into a commercial success. And so I think we're obviously tackling that from two perspectives. We have to uplift big sectors of our economy to have more involvement in that market. And then I think that's where vehicles like the IDF really play a strong role in providing that capital that's very focused in that direction. And then there's probably another direction where I suppose a lot of my engagements have been held on, okay, we want to create a commercial business in an existing sector, in my case insurance, and what is the capital availability there? I think the investment lens is a bit different. So naturally, in a startup investment, your investors are looking for an IRR of 35% to anywhere between 35 and 55%, and depending on the stage of the business. And that means that you have to have a very big commercial proposition, that the future expectation of profits is there, the yield is there to justify that the valuation can grow and that you can return that capital in order for investors to have confidence to say, okay, cool, we think you can do this. And I think it's somewhat easier to prove that out when the market exists and there's market dynamics and assumptions which can be proved externally in the projection models you build, rather than having to go and create brand new markets and then make a lot of untested assumptions on how that's going to pan out. So I think the two different lenses are very unique, and that's why I think it's important to tackle it from two perspectives when it comes to the capital pool.
If Vuyani wants to say...
Yeah, I want to say something, and I agree with him. But I just want to take, if you listen to this conversation now, and it's quite sophisticated conversation. When I say sophisticated, it's really high-end conversation. And when you then take this and then look at many people who want to start businesses selling simplified products and services, it's not simple. They have to go through the same thinking in terms of putting together the business plan, looking at access to finance, all of that. It may be more complex as you get into a different business structure. But we have a myriad of people who want to get into entrepreneurship. Some of them not because of love of entrepreneurship, but as a pure survivalist thing. What models then must we put in place for the country to simplify the complexity of getting into business so that you can actually have access to finance? I think the bottom of the pyramid, common vanilla business opportunities, selling something to somebody else, which is a generic product, not unique, should be simplified, and it should be backed by a model that allows access to finance, access to market. And this is where I think the failure of the world sits is that everything is bespoke. Everything must struggle to say, I'll find the market for myself. The sophisticated businesses where you need to look at that. But generic projects, businesses, whether it's in agri-produce, all of that, to sell something to somebody, whether it's textile, we should be able to create those and build models that de-risks the investors. I'll make this example that, for example, if you look at the transportation, the e-hailing businesses are doing exactly this. They are de-risking, they are onboarding more people who otherwise would not be in business. But because they have a domain expertise, I can drive, I'm not a criminal, then I can get a vehicle and be in business. Simplified. How do we do many of those things to onboard more people across industries? And that's the solution we need to look at.
And I want to move from this to Lyle, because Lyle, you have an incredible opportunity where you are creating access to real-time payments for individuals, for businesses. How do you see technology potentially utilizing the data it receives in the work that you're doing, especially in finance, to help SMMEs or MSMEs to be able to get the track record and the leverage so that they can actually be a sustainable business long term? So how does technology play a role to solve for this systemic challenge?
I definitely think some of the things that are difficult for small businesses, because ultimately they're focusing on growing their business. Payments is one of those fundamental needs. And I think at the moment, with the access to all of the options that they have, so currently with pay reduced from a pay shop request view, I think that obviously gives one access to customers that don't have credit cards potentially, as well as better liquidity management because funds clear quicker. And I think Ozo's role, as well as other PSPs in the country, is obviously to give access to these technologies, to make them affordable and to automate all of the back office tasks. I think we also mentioned some AI stuff. I think that's going to help SMEs or MSMEs quite a bit. Because also you don't need all of the potential roles in the early stage of the business, which will help accelerate the journey quite a lot, I think. But I think there's a few fundamentals that are now much more accessible and should definitely help MSMEs grow.
And Lyle, the question that I really want to then also add on to that, and I might be repeating it a little bit, is the data that you receive from the transactions that you help individuals to process on a daily basis. What are the opportunities that technology offers to track revenue, to track profitability, to track sustainability of that business? Because ultimately, in SMMEs have to go out and they have to say, here's what my track record is, here's the business that I'm doing, here's the revenue that I'm driving, but I need credit because I need to scale, and this is the reason why the data is giving me this information. Are we at a point where we're able to use technology to help this huge band of people to have access to the data required for them to get funding?
So I think there's some interesting models that are coming to fruition. I think it's based on payment history or transaction history through the payments that you're receiving. There's quite a few companies offering credit through those lines, so it might not be capital. There's also like purchase order funding. So I think the technology is giving the data to kind of de-risk these credit options, which I know quite a few businesses are scaling up to provide those services to MSMEs as well.
Thank you, Lyle. And I think I want us to stay on the conversation of the data and the technology. Jade, we're not speaking about AI in the sense that, in ChatGPT or DeepSeek, right? We're talking about the ability to use technology to generate information. In the Lephalala environment, you've solved some of your own hurdles in making AI an African solution. How did you go about doing that?
So at Lalapa AI, we're really focused on language AI, but not in the sense of necessarily having a ChatGPT, but in some sense of how can we all connect better in order to serve customers better, in order to get access to more services. And so for us, what we've noticed is that so many of the AI tools aren't actually speaking our languages. And only 1 in 10 South Africans, actually rather, let's say it this way, 9 in 10 South Africans don't speak English at home, right? Similar stat in Nigeria. Over 200 million people speak Swahili. And so I think something we need to bring into this conversation is this concept of language, is that, you know, if we build instructors, but we only build them in English, if we build an education, but we only build them in English, who exactly are we capturing, particularly from your micro business market? And so from within Lalapa, this is, you know, what we do is we're building the tools to enable that sort of thing. We actually ran a hackathon a year ago, and one of the contestants went and built a application where you could just give your stock take and your sales, you could just speak it into your phone. So like WhatsApp bots, just voice note it, and it would take that and it would convert it into you know, an actual, you know, accounting system. So it will be backed by an account, so you could have a report and you could have something that, were you to go for financing, you now actually are recording your transactions in a way that didn't require you to have particular language access, that didn't require you to have particular, you know, specific abilities with a tool. How are you training on these, you know, having access to a laptop, etc. And so what are we building for you know, people who don't necessarily speak English and who don't necessarily have access to accounting systems or accountants or that kind of back knowledge? And I think that's kind of very much talking to some of the stuff that we've been discussing here.
And technology is one aspect. We've got the regulatory aspect. So there are a number of aspects. Simbisai, you deal with the person coming through wanting to raise funding. You've dealt with, you know, your jade size of a business in technology and all sorts. What are the hurdles that they are still coming to you with? And you saying, we need to solve for this. This is not enabling the environment. This is constraining this business.
Yeah, we do have a criteria that we use in terms of screening our pipeline. So the pipeline are the applications that come through. You know, especially for technology businesses, it's very important, I mean, for one to be able to really define what problem they are solving for, you know. I think in the case of Pineapple, they are disrupting the insurance sector. And then given that we've got traditional insurance players already, you know, your old mutuals, your Santam, your Sanlam, how are they hoping to really disrupt the market and gain market share from them? Because then that informs, you know, their growth story, that informs the valuations, that informs, you know, that certain milestones that the business has to reach, as well as the return on our investment. Because we also pull money from investors who want us to give back the money with a certain return expectation. So that is very important for you to be able to define, you know, what problem are you solving for. And then as well as a product market fit, that is very, very important as well, I think, when we are also assessing the applications that come our way. It is also important, I think, one of the things that we do, especially for technology businesses, is we get experts, technology experts, to test the technology. So we've got a tool that we use that tests technology readiness. Because sometimes, and I've seen some startups failing to get to their next stage of growth because the technology is not built in such a way that it can support, you know, maybe additional customers on the platform or other things or other nuances that can go wrong with technology. So that is quite important. And I think when we also start talking about valuations, because with most of these startup businesses, technology businesses, I mean, we obviously put in venture capital, you know. So when we are taking up equity in the business, what does it mean, you know? And for us, we don't just deploy capital, but like I said, we create value in the business. So setting up governance structures is quite important. Sometimes active management, we don't take a majority stake as a minority stake, but then we live up to our proposition that we are a value catalyst, you know. So our value creation throughout the life cycle of our investment in that particular business is quite important. So an entrepreneur also who is willing to work with the investor to make the business work is quite critical, because we have to be involved to protect our investment.
You know, today we're talking, I think you here really representing as the sophisticated channel to gaining, you know, in investment. So you have to be quite a sophisticated business, you know, like Ozo or Pineapple, and you're really raising millions. But then there's also a strata of society, I don't know what the numbers are, but far bigger strata of society that's never going to get to a point where they're needing to you know, to have very sophisticated solutions. They in everyday economy, you know, we saw the Pick and Pay conversation with the CEO where he said the spaza shop is disrupting their model as a Pick and Pay store. So that disruption, what is the opportunity for response from SMEs in terms of how they think about their participation in the market?
So I think my sense is that we have a big opportunity to scale the involvement of small businesses. And there are businesses that are very IP-centric, tech-centric. They serve a purpose to get South Africa into the top league. That's important. They deal with specific issues. But I think if we are going to deal with the issue of a more inclusive economy, we have to simplify the entry point so that everyone who has something to sell can sell it profitably. Then in that case, you are able to crowd in capital into the system. I do not believe that the shortage of capital to invest in small businesses is such a big issue as against the riskiness of the underlying businesses on SMEs. So if we solve the underlying issue, we're probably going to see more private capital flows into this segment. The challenge we have, all the instruments that have been in place are instruments like credit guarantee scheme. The credit guarantee scheme are great. Take the first loss, they're okay, but they don't deal with the underlying risk, which means you're still going to have a large number of people who want to start up, want to do business, not having access. So I think we have the opportunity to look at business models that have what I call technical assistance aspect, that looks at access to market, that looks at production proficiency skill. If you are a producer, if you are a grain producer startup, and your business case says you must be a 5 tons per hectare producer, are you going to apply for funding and you're sitting at 3 tons per hectare? Who helps you to get to 5 tons per hectare within a shortest period of time and gives you access to a grain buyer, so to speak, whether it's a producer like Tiger Brands and so on. So we're missing this part, and that's what we can use to crowd in. Some of them will be digital platforms. Others will be just business models that are held by people through bare knuckles to actually make sure we can bring more people across board. So opportunities there. I think we're spending a lot of time looking at financial instruments that don't deal with the underlying risk. They just caution the investor. We have to deal with the underlying risk and we have to invest there. And I think in that way we can scale. I did say, if I look at the logistics sector, food distribution, you look at the people movement, whether those companies, whether it's Uber or Bolt or the e-hailing ones, if you fund a vehicle that is in that system, chances of seeing impairments are very low unless the driver is lazy or just plain not wanting to work. So how do we get those into other industries and then have a huge multiplier effect and so on in participation? So I think we're spending time looking for old instruments and tweaking them. We need to be kind of revolutionary in thinking and go where the pain is and solve it. I think we can scale. Yeah.
And I want to ask Lyle this, because you've done this a few times, Lyle. Now as the founder of Ozo and the chief product officer, but also you did Teleshow Technologies before that, you did the 315, you also did the innovation group. Are the numbers in the market attracting you and giving hope? Maybe you can give us an indication. You know, what is the growth opportunity when you have these tech solutions, you plug them in, you manage to let them land in the market? What is your growth looking like?
I think growth in Africa and South Africa is actually looking a lot better based on what we're hearing from banks overseas that we've spoken to. I think they're looking at very slow growth rates, which actually means I think that there's obviously a large interest in investing in the African economy. I think in Africa at the moment, just like in our space right now, all of the companies are growing. Like I know everyone tries to make it seem like they're doing the best, but I think there's a huge need for payment services, obviously, but I think the businesses as well that we provide in these services, we can see the growth on their side as well. So I think there's definitely, especially from online commerce, there's definitely large growth at the moment.
And we're a small market in comparison to the US, but you're saying that our growth rates are quite high. Are they high in terms of the numbers, or does that also get matched with the profitability of accessing these markets and getting products out, successfully as an SME? Do we see the revenue complementing it?
I think the return on investment for investors, definitely there's a higher growth rate. Obviously, there's higher risk as well, potentially, especially in funding early stage businesses. I think, obviously, the numbers don't compare to the US in particular, but I definitely think that there's a lot of investors that are targeting Africa right now because of the high growth rates, and they do understand that as infrastructure improves, so will the opportunities.
Thank you. So we have the numbers. Matthew, I'm going to stay with numbers with you as well. We have the untapped numbers. We have a lot of people under the age of 30, under the age of 35. And that's just in South Africa. You've also got the whole continent. Are you seeing great opportunity in the numbers from a Pineapple perspective? What are the growth projection numbers look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we're an incredibly entrepreneurial country. So the majority of our formal employment happens at SME level. I think in terms of our business specifically, one of our key drivers is 2/3 of the cars on the road are uninsured. And if you think about that, and to Riani's point, when you think about the economies that are being created, the businesses being created out of logistics and transport, when you have someone's car being the primary enabler of them earning an income, if that car gets into an accident or gets stolen and they're not able to put themselves back in that economy, now you've lost that whole node in the economy. So for us, a big part is how do we get those people to insure their vehicles, to start being part of the formal, making better financial decisions. In terms of overall opportunity abroad, I think a big trend is, and it's something where it lies more in the tech space because you need that tech to be scalable. But if you think about the services that we're using more and more often, a lot of those services are originating in the US. When I take an Uber trip, 20% of the revenue that I'm paying isn't landing in this country, it's going there. And so a big question is, how do we reverse that trend, or at least start to compete where instead of us using services that have been exported to us, we are exporting services and technology to other countries. And I think there are some regulatory barriers to get over there. I think we also need to look at how do we back technology startups that might not be targeting a very specific impact in South Africa, but if we can get them to impact the world, we can grow our economy. So if you take, for instance, a startup that's looking at wearable data and taking a picture of your face and how much you use your phone and putting all those things together to predict your longevity or how healthy you are, that has applications everywhere, right? And if we can enable people to go, well, let's develop that technology here. We've got a lot of young people who are very smart. They want to be entrepreneurial. They're exploring these ideas. If we enable those and fund those, and those things have impact overseas, then we can bring that revenue back. So I think there is big opportunity.
And it's about the funding environment. I mean, you might have those innovative people coming up with those solutions, but if the environment for funding them and enabling them, like a Silicon Valley, is not thriving as much, which is why we have some of the technology by South Africans thriving in another country, coming back to South Africa, and then we're paying it back to another country, right? So that's definitely what we want to reverse. But Jade, I want to ask you 2 questions because I'm really tempted to talk to you. There's 2 challenges here. Is your own milestones as an entity that you've had to overcome. I'm sure you've talked about them so many times. But the other question is, how are you seeing us solving for them, not just for for yourself, but for other SMEs that want to come into the sector?
Yeah, I think if I think about my journey, I didn't expect to end up an entrepreneur. And one of the things I noticed as moving in is that it was actually very hard to understand what one needs to do to get going. What does fundraising look like? What does startup fundraising look like? What does it mean to put together a pitch deck? Who do you go to? How do you get in contact with investors? I spent 6 months, you email people, you try to get introductions. What if you don't have those networks? And so there's a portion of initial, widespread education. In many ways, I think it should be at a school level, as much as possible, or easy, making things easy to access in a very community-oriented way, so that people can get going. Then there's an aspect of opportunities to access to those networks, which get you to capital, or people who have capital. And we were lucky enough to have access to that through, the areas that we were in, but so many organizations don't have that, and they stop there. And there's almost like we don't have a high enough density of people who are already in that startup world getting access to capital to be able to spread it enough and be able to spread those networks. And so I find access to those networks is something, how can we improve that access would be super beneficial. And then the last one is once you've started and you've gotten going and you found the right people to build with, and you might have some capital, we hit the regulatory hurdles, which is if we are getting investment and it isn't coming from within South Africa, there are many reasons why organizations don't, or no, international VCs, for example, don't necessarily want to invest in South Africa. And it's often getting money in is very difficult. It takes months and months and months and months just to get through the regulation of someone externally investing in our country, which is very strange. And similarly, we've got issues around when you sell your business, there's a tax on the IP, which doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. It happens, we get, this corporate tax, which happens everywhere, but taxing your IP means that inherently your organization is, 20% less valuable to external investors. And so my challenge to the regulator is what are we doing about that? That particular regulation is from the before times, hasn't been updated in years. And I think it's ripe for change and would really allow money to flow in and out of South Africa and into these organizations that really need it. Yeah.
It's an excellent point. Thank you for putting them on the table. And it's difficult to understand that we're so far down the line, and yet we've got these great development institutions. There isn't a lack of money in the system, right? But there's a reluctance to allow that money to flow. And Simbisai, is there a reluctance to let the money flow by the investor, or really are we just not creating that conducive environment for SMEs through regulation, through our banking sectors, through all of that? And how does, Vian is here, what are the conversations that need to be had to ease that from a South African regulatory perspective, and then from a global understanding of what we are facing in South Africa?
I personally think that as an ecosystem, there's a lot of synergies that exist, in order for us to then catalyze the growth of the SME space in South Africa. You find that we've got many funders who fund across different asset classes, We are one of those that fund across debt, PE, venture capital, and he was earlier on talking about township economy. When we launched the Township Economy Fund earlier this year, we were surprised with the amount of quality deals that we actually received from the township economy. A sector that has always been perceived as very high risk, to say. I think when people are talking about township economy, they are thinking about your spaza shop only. They are thinking about a butcher at a shopping center. They are thinking about a market, where you're selling vegetables on the corner of the street. But there's so much interesting things that people there are doing, and some of it is for purchase order financing, which is a transaction. But again, back to a regulation, I think there is more, to discuss between private investors, the government as well. When you find for big infrastructure projects, you've got triple P, collaborations where you've got the public and the private partnership. We need to have the same, in this ecosystem, where the government really plays, a role in order to bring in all ecosystem players in one room, and also providing that catalytic capital that has got concessionary rates, in order to unlock, other capital from private players. I think it's very, very important to take that approach that has been done with big infrastructure projects, because SMEs funding conversation is almost like a by-the-way thing. We need to bring it back, into the mainstream in terms of the conversations, priority of the government conversations, to say, how do we really unlock the potential of this important engine of the economy? Because this is the only sector that is actively producing jobs, and with the high unemployment rates in the country, that needs to be abated. But then there is a bigger role to play if all ecosystems come together and really address the regulatory challenges, like what she said, and other red tape issues that are prevalent in the ecosystem.
Thank you for leaning into that. Vianney, I'm going to come to you now. I want to go to Lyle quickly with a very simple question. Lyle, the door of opportunity for the kind of innovations that you have put to the table, do you see even more opportunities that you believe that need to be gone after, whether it be you, but whether it be other players? And leaning in on what we're talking about, how do you then simplify solutions that you can solve, problems or challenges for those SMEs utilizing tools like the ones you've come up with?
I think it's something, obviously, like our business is built around, is kind of taking the hassle of receiving payments, reconciling them, more accessible and easier for users that don't need to really understand that space. I think PayShop, even though it's still in quite early stages in terms of adoption, I think online, that's about to change. I think we're going live with a few merchants in the upcoming month. And I think that's obviously a lot cheaper one than credit card payments. And obviously the liquidity aspect I spoke of before gives the smaller business access to that payment a lot quicker, that they can basically then plug in again to either buy more stock or use as they need. And we also automate the payout aspect. So I think that there's a lot of technology available, not only from a payments perspective, that can take the hassle so that the entrepreneur can focus on their business and just focus on scaling that. And I think capital also is, I don't want to say it's more accessible, but it's not the only solution to assist these businesses. And I think those options will continue to grow in future. I know we're looking at potential options, as well as many other players in the industry that are also looking at how do you calculate the risk, as you spoke about earlier, and give finance to these businesses.
So we're really talking about two elements. Is one, those who are seeking opportunities and those who are entering this market are looking at solving simple problems, simplifying it. But whatever you're simplifying for, it's about the long-term sustainability of the entire ecosystem. I love the example of the Uber. If his car is off and is not insured, he can't get back into the system. So even when we offer these solutions, and the solutions you're talking to about ease of payment, same time payment, lower rates, we're solving for an infrastructure when we utilize technology. The key pieces that we still need to bring in is, how do we make regulation easy? How do we bring in the SME so that they plug in, in an easier way into the system? How do we provide concessions? It's a very exciting conversation, but I do want to open it up quickly and see if I can get one or two questions before we close off our online session, and we are going to continue. So I know I can feel the panel is burning with a number of issues. But do you have somebody with a very simple, to the point question that we can address quickly? Please do stand up. You raised your question quickly.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to answer the lady there. She brought a very good subject. She spoke about the language. Language cannot stop us to do business in Africa. We see Chinese are everywhere. The most thing we need to do is to access to market. We need to help small business in South Africa access Africa market. And now you are bringing something very important where it's a concept connecting Africa business to business forum. Because we discovered that, I'm originally from Cameroon, French speaking. We discovered that South Africa do have very beautiful product and service. But the only thing is a lack to access to market. But now we are collaborating with the African embassy, especially Francophone African embassy in Pretoria. We will bring
So I think, sorry to cut you short. So I want to really capture that question because I have to take one more question before for the online audience. So and we'll come back to it a bit later if you want to. So it's about access to market. So enabling businesses to access the market from across the continent with ease. So I really want to make sure that we're going to take an opportunity to speak a little bit more about that. But if I can just take the next question, please. And I'm just going to take these two questions, and then we'll be able to do a continuous Q&A thereafter. And your question, thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm Mielani Mkabela. I think my question comes to innovation and creativity, to our entrepreneur. If you are having a business that has been generated through high innovation, it hasn't been listed yet. It might not have made 5 million value yet. How on earth you would like to sell that business globally outside of your country of origin, while that business can be bought with 3.5 million in South Africa cash? How on earth will you like to sell it outside of the country while your country could be looking for such same businesses, and it is innovation that is looking for the future? Those are sustainable businesses that could really run the continent for a longer time. I just want to understand that.
Maybe to try and reframe the question a little bit. And it was interesting for me as well that we talked about international investments, right? What is the attractiveness to international investments versus saying that there's money locally, there's investors locally with money? I'm gonna take it to you actually, and say, what is your view on international versus local investment from an appetite and an attractiveness for an investor?
Yes, thank you very much. Especially those innovative technology businesses, you find that there are very few players in the VC space. So it's all about investor appetite. And because some of these international investors, they've been exposed to the same businesses. I think when AI came a few years ago, these innovations normally start, in the US or in Europe. So they are quite familiar with the models. They quite understand the valuations. They quite understand how the future looks with this. And then sometimes local investors, it's just that they are risk averse. Yeah. They don't have the level of appetite that an international investor has. Also, sometimes the structuring the terms, maybe this is more longer term patient capital than they are able to raise locally. So hence, then they would go with an international investor, because it's also about an investor who understands the business, who can add value to the business. So that is quite important.
Thank you so much. Could not have been answered better. We're going to come back. But Matthew, did you want to lean in on that question as well quickly?
Yeah, I think there's a dynamic there where it's not a trade-off of, I either have to make sure that why should I not consider international investment? I think the more investment that we can have flowing into the country, the better for everyone, because that's going to support businesses, whether those businesses are servicing a market inside or outside the country. We're growing jobs here, we're growing our GDP here, and that has to be the first principle of what we're after. I think to remove the regulatory barriers is not a case of, okay, I don't want to raise capital here, or I don't want to sell my business here. It's more a case of the more access to funding we can have, the better. And for a lot of those international investors, a key constraint is, all right, if your business grows to a certain point, and now I've funded you from Europe or from America, I've got a connection, I want to expand the business here. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles that will allow a South African domiciled business to be able to do that. And that dampens the investment opportunity for those people to have the confidence to put the money into the system.
Vuyani, take us to the last part of the question, and I think it's also about access to each other as enterprises.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think the first part I want to just tackle a little bit is around the regulatory environment. So firstly, in South Africa, we are fortunate because we've got the Small Business Development Department. I think to be honest, if you look at the attitudes in the department, they think like SMEs. Yes, you can't make government a business, but I think they are wired to want to solve the SME issue. What I think is missing is a convening platform that enables all the ecosystems that exist to actually engage with the department in a meaningful way. We've seen this with the few months we've been on Start-Up20. The level of engagement, level of enthusiasm, the level of interest, the level of receptiveness to ideas is there. This is a big difference between big business. Big business have got BUSA, have got Black Business Council. They are very powerful. They can drive the cabinet. In the SME voice is fragmented, and startup is almost not there. You've got sporadic ecosystem that exists. So what we intend to do as we do this G20 work as Start-Up20, we want to institutionalize the Start-Up20 to live longer the South Africa's presidency, to be able to actually be that convening platform that enables all startups, all voices to have an ability to talk to government. I think the regulation thing is super important. We have to get government policy bias for startups. The policies must be biased for startups, whether it's procurement policies, whether it's exchange controls, whether it's just, I mean, I'll make the example in the sector that I'm in telecoms. The big businesses got license access to spectrum long time ago. There's silence with regards to small business. So there's a lot to fix there, so on the regulation.
Vuyani, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to our audience that have joined us online. Thank you for connecting to CNBC Africa. To my guests, please do look them up and follow them. Simbisai Chizande, who's the Chief Operations Officer at IDF Capital, and Lyle Eckstein, the co-founder and Chief Product Officer from Ozo, who's joined us online. Thank you so much. Matthew Smith, Managing Director and co-founder of Pineapple, and Jade Abbott, the CTO and co-founder of Lalape AI. Thank you so much. From me, Zanella Morrison. We're going to continue the conversations on the ground, and we'll connect with you later on.